Imagine it's a cold, grey January morning in 1649. The streets of London are eerily quiet. Before the banqueting house in Whitehall stands a black-draped scaffold, its shadow ominously stretching over the gathered crowd. Breath hangs in the frosty air as tension grips the spectators. On this day, a king, once the sovereign of England, Scotland, and Ireland, steps forward to face an unthinkable fate: execution by his own subjects. Imagine standing there. What would you feel as King Charles I, a man who believed he was divinely chosen, prepared to meet his end? Would you sense justice, horror, or perhaps something in between? This is the story of the only British monarch to be executed, a king whose reign was plagued by conflict, betrayal, and an unshakable belief in his divine right, culminating in one of the most dramatic moments in the story of a nation. This is raw history. Charles Stuart was born in 1600. The second son of King James VI of Scotland and Anne of Denmark. When his older brother Henry died in 1612, Charles became heir apparent. By 1625, he ascended the throne, embracing the divine right of kings, the belief that monarchs were chosen by God and accountable only to him. This conviction shaped his reign and, ultimately, his downfall. From the very start, Charles's rule faced significant challenges. His 1625 marriage to Henrietta Maria of France, a Catholic princess, sparked fears of a shift towards Catholicism in Protestant England and deepened religious tensions already simmering across the kingdom. Charles's early reign was plagued by financial woes. Costly military campaigns like the failed 1625 expedition to Cadiz and the botched relief of the Huguenots at La Rochelle in 1627 drained the royal treasury. Parliament, wary of his intentions, refused to grant funds without addressing its grievances. Frustrated, Charles turned to controversial methods, reviving obsolete taxes and imposing forced loans, actions that only widened the rift between Crown and Parliament. In 1629, Charles dissolved Parliament entirely, beginning an 11-year stretch known as the Personal Rule, or the 11 Years' Tyranny. During this time, he bypassed parliamentary approval, relying on prerogative courts and unpopular taxes like ship money. Extending this wartime tax to inland regions during peacetime outraged his subjects and sowed the seeds of rebellion. Religious tensions escalated under Charles's reign as well. In 1633, he appointed William Laud as Archbishop of Canterbury, whose enforcement of high church rituals alienated Puritans. The introduction of a Book of Common Prayer in Scotland in 1637 provoked riots and led to the formation of the National Covenant, a direct challenge to Charles's authority. This unrest culminated in the Bishops' Wars between 1639 and 1640, which depleted the royal treasury further and forced Charles to recall Parliament, ending the 11 Years' Tyranny. The short Parliament of 1640 lasted just 3 weeks before Charles dissolved it again in frustration. However, the longer Parliament, convened later that year, began systematically dismantling his royal authority. In 1642, tensions boiled over when Charles attempted to arrest 5 members of the House of Commons for treason. Forewarned, they escaped, leaving Charles humiliated. However, this act shattered any remaining trust and led directly to the outbreak of the English Civil War later that year. The conflict divided the nation. Royalists backed the king, while parliamentarians sought to limit his powers. Early battles like Edge Hill in 1642 were inconclusive, but the formation of a disciplined new model army in 1645 began to tip the scales. Decisive victories for the parliamentarians at Naseby and Langport soon left the king's forces in ruins. Captured in 1646, Charles continued secret negotiations, igniting a second civil war in 1648. However, this rebellion was swiftly crushed, leaving parliamentarians convinced that peace was impossible while Charles lived. In January 1649, a High Court of Justice was convened to try Charles for treason. He refused to recognize its legitimacy, maintaining that a king could not be judged by his subjects. Despite his defiance, though, the court quickly found him guilty and sentenced him to death. Aware of the bitter cold, he wore 2 shirts to prevent shivering from being mistaken as fear. Before the axe fell, he proclaimed, "I am the martyr of the people." With one stroke, his head was severed, and a stunned silence enveloped the crowd. Some dipped their handkerchiefs in his blood, believing it held divine properties, a final act of reverence for a man many still saw as God's chosen ruler. The execution of Charles I was more than the death of a king. It was a seismic shift in the balance of power. England was declared a republic, and the monarchy was abolished. However, this Commonwealth quickly centralized under Oliver Cromwell, whose rule as a Lord Protector was marked by strict Puritanism and continued conflict. By 1660, the monarchy was restored under Charles II, ending England's brief experiment with republicanism. Yet, the execution of Charles I left an indelible mark, challenging the divine right of kings and paving the way for the constitutional monarchy that still governs Britain today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most dramatic moments, hit the like and subscribe button for more of these pivotal stories. Was Charles I's execution justice or a step too far? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.